from, but we are going to begin tonight's presentation. Thank you all so very much for taking time out of your busy lives to join us for our second Resilient Raptors webinar series. Before we begin, I do want to acknowledge, come on, here we go, that we are streaming from our state headquarters in Concord, New Hampshire, which is located within the site of the ancient village of Pennacook in Endakina, which is the traditional ancestral homeland and waterways of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki people, past and present. I would like to acknowledge and honor with gratitude the land and waterways and our ancestors, the Alnambak, who have stewarded Endakina throughout the generations for thousands of years. New Hampshire Audubon is honored to continue the stewardship of these lands, providing opportunities for people to form connections to the natural world through our programs and wildlife sanctuaries located around the state. I invite you to learn more about the Indigenous presence on the land you occupy by visiting the website native-land.ca. Here, you can explore and click on territories of Indigenous people and get connected to resources to learn more. For a more in-depth understanding of the Granite State specifically, check out all of the educational resources found at indigenousnh.com. Some quick Zoom information before we begin. We do have about 135 folks registered for this evening's talk, so you'll see that we are in complete webinar mode per usual, which means that while you can see us through our cameras and you can hear us, we cannot do the same for you. You guys are completely incognito, so feel free to sit back, relax. Hopefully some of you are in your pajamas already, have a snack, have a drink, and enjoy tonight's informative, entertaining education. Please feel free to use the chat button, which actually I think is down there. It's up here for me, it's down there for you guys, to reflect on anything that comes to mind as the program continues, but reserve the Q&A specifically for questions. We will try our absolute best to get to every single question this evening. And we actually have some time allotted in between different topics, as well as at the finality of this particular program. For those of you who joined us for Resilient Raptors last time, welcome back. Your enthusiasm for our organization, and more specifically, these incredible birds around us, it's so greatly appreciated. And for those of you attending for the first time this evening, we are truly glad you can join us. Thank you for your interest in tonight's highlighted topic of the adaptations and traits of these amazing, iconic American bald eagles. Additional thanks go out to the various libraries helping to promote and market our Resilient Raptors webinar series. Tonight's webinar is hosted by the Concord Public Library. The Concord Public Library engages, inspires, and informs the community, supporting its civic, intellectual, and cultural pursuits. It is an inclusive environment that celebrates the diversity of experience, ideas, and cultures. It offers free programming for all ages, discounted museum passes, books, movies, and more, including, this is very cool, its brand new Library of Things, where you can check things out from metal detectors and trail cameras to instruments, and I think it's like a karaoke situation. Lastly, another super cool thing the Concord Public Library provides is these really cool e-bike bookmobiles, which are great for bringing the library to the community. Thank you so much for your support, Concord Public Library, and hi, Becky. We're so glad to have you back. I apologize because I briefly forgot to give accolades to the American Eagle Foundation, whose amazing support, donation support, has enabled us to not only design these webinars and do the research that brings them to you guys, but to actually submit them and get them to you through our Zoom platform. So thank you, huge accolades to American Eagle Foundation.
That's right.
That is right. So one last thing before we jump into tonight's topic. I know this is a mouthful, but for those of you who don't know, New Hampshire Audubon is a state-based environmental nonprofit organization that is completely independent from National Audubon. We rely on members and donors like you to support our charitable mission, which has 4 programmatic pillars. Researching trends and discovering solutions for species in peril through conservation. What, Chris Martin?
That's my part.
Connecting people to nature through educational school programs, field trips, summer camps, and webinars like these. That's my role over here, Willa Soroka, Education Specialist, NHA. We also provide land stewardship to approximately 10,000 acres of wildlife sanctuaries throughout the state for habitat as well as recreation. And lastly, we advocate for sound environmental policy in the New Hampshire State Legislature to protect the natural environment for both wildlife as well as people. If anyone in attendance tonight is a volunteer or a member or a supporter of New Hampshire Audubon, I would like to sincerely thank you. We simply could not achieve our charitable mission without you. If you'd like to become a part of our conservation family today, please consider checking out our website for ways to get involved. Whew. All right, now on to the big stuff. Tonight's presentation, we've provided you a very brief outline so you know what's coming up around the bed. First and foremost, we are taking last month's topic of Raptors 101, a very brief presentation on what it is that makes a raptor, or a bird of prey, before we segue over to Chris, who's going to specifically talk about those amazing traits and adaptations, those specialized adaptations of these iconic symbols. And then we're going to wrap up the program with a brief history of pre-DDT bald eagles here in the Northern Hemisphere, specifically in the United States of America, where the territory we're going to be referring to throughout the program is the US territory. So without further ado, I'm going to slow down and start talking raptor. So what makes a raptor a raptor? Well, it's important to firstly recognize where the word raptor even comes from. A lot of folks think of raptors as dinosaurs, which isn't entirely wrong. They are pretty darn close, and they have a lot of similarities. But the word raptor comes from the Latin rapere, meaning to seize or take by force, and refers pretty specifically to those talons, because raptors grab their prey with those talons attached to their legs. We have here in New Hampshire, we're going to be talking about breeding species of raptors, not raptors that might fly through. We're not talking about the stellar sea eagle who may or may not come by the coast at some point in time. We're talking about the species that actually breed and raise their young here in the Granite State. And here in New Hampshire, we have approximately, and by approximately, I mean, we actually have, sorry about that. We have 8 hawk species. We have 10 owl species. We have 1 vulture species, or
maybe 2.
Or maybe, is the black one, is he breeding here too?
We haven't confirmed a nest yet, but we have seen regular presence of pairs of black vultures in a couple places.
I've seen them too, but I'm not sure they're
people are from, like Walpole.
Oh, fair enough. Yes,
yeah.
We are remembering this is Granite State. Massachusetts, you guys have a couple more species than we do. But we also have our 3 falcons, including our illustrious, charismatic peregrine falcon from our last Resilient Raptors webinar series. And we have 1 osprey who is in a complete different class all to themselves, as well as 1 breeding eagle, who of course, you guys know, is the bald. Now, while practicing this just the other day, Chris popped in and mentioned that we actually have another breeding species of raptor that I was unaware of. So I'm gonna pass it over to Chris.
Well, I'm gonna mention 2 things actually.
Oh gosh.
If we were doing this in the 1950s, we would say that we had 2 eagle species, because at that point there were golden eagles nesting in New Hampshire. And I hope that while I'm still alive, we'll see golden eagles nesting again in New Hampshire in our mountains. But right now, you're right, just 1 eagle species. The other one that's interesting is at our seacoast now, there's for lack of a better word, almost a colony of Mississippi kites, birds that ought to be further south that somehow have wandered into the Northeast and breed regularly in the towns around Durham, New Hampshire. Again, just a handful, maybe 2 to 5 pairs, but that's yet another group of raptors, diurnal raptors. So.
Amazing. And I imagine we will be seeing new trends as our climate continues to do some adjustments.
Yeah, and the point is that these things are fluid. Species ranges change over time in various different ways, not just increasing, but sometimes decreasing.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. So let's talk about some of the traits that these raptors have in common. And these are the defining features. So all raptors have sharp talons, as we can see in this image depicting a red-tailed hawk's clenched talons. They are formidable. They are astounding. They are not using their beak so much for defense as they are those talons, and they're using the talons predominantly as tools. We'll talk more about that in a bit. Raptors also have a ratchet grip, which is pretty incredible in itself as well. You guys can see in this image, we're looking at the blue and the red that looks almost like those clinches in a zip tie. And the idea of this ratchet grip is that it makes a raptor's talons easy to clench and remain in that strong grip. So if they are carrying prey away, it's not utilizing excess energy by utilizing muscles. It's a sheath covering the tendon that is holding it in place. Pretty phenomenal stuff. Those feet are a force to be reckoned with. All raptors also have a hooked beak. And in the case of our falcon species, they also have a really unique notch and tomial tooth, allow for some really intense severing of spinal cords during takeoff with a prey. We're not going to see that so much in our bald eagle because they're not in the falcon family, but they still have that hooked beak designed for efficiently ripping and tearing flesh, as well as preening and grooming, among other things. Another trait that all raptors have in common is those incredible eyes. It's not just the vision of the eyes that cause a whoa, stop and stare moment, but the acuity of those eyes. Raptors are capable of seeing for genuine miles. It's astounding. I'm sure most of you guys in the audience have heard the phrase eagle eyes or eyes like a hawk. That is a truth. Their vision is exceptional, and it helps them survive by allowing them to hunt prey and also avoid being prey. The last thing that classifies a raptor as a raptor, if we're using these features, is that all raptors are carnivorous. They are not omnivores switching between meat and vegetation. They strictly eat meat. Now, in the case of the bald eagle, who is a bit of an opportunist, sort of kind of like this barred owl here, their range of diet is from things that are already dead, roadkill, things that have been shot and left in the woods, as well as fish that they hunt from themselves or fish that they steal from others. But some birds, some raptors, are very specialized, as is the case with our peregrine falcon. While they may eat the occasional bat, probably because it mimics a bird, their diet is specifically bird-based. So carnivores throughout, but some have varying different diets. Now that you guys are all raptor specialists, you know that they all have sharp talons and ratchet grips and hooked beaks, exceptional eyesight, and they are carnivorous. Let's do a quick quiz. Raptor or not? Sometimes it's really easy to determine whether a bird is a raptor or not, right?
Or not.
Or not. But sometimes things can get a little shady, as is the case of this bird here, who's clearly carnivorous, hanging on to what appears to be a vole, who very obviously has a hooked beak designed for tearing and severing flesh, but we can't see the talons or toes. The eyes appear to be closer to the side rather than straight in front. Is this a raptor? The shrike is not classified as a raptor, although there are some ornithologists who are trying to argue differently. That said, check out this weirdo. This is a secretary bird. Secretary birds do not have talons or feet designed to clasp or hold on to prey, and yet they are classified as raptors. Look at this goober. That's our only vulture species here breeding, breeding vulture species here in New Hampshire. And that doesn't look much like the raptors we just talked about a moment ago either. So everyone taking a good look at that nose right there? You can actually see directly through the nostrils, a really amazing, astounding feature of these carrion eating species. They do not have feet designed for grasping, but they are, by definition, classified as raptors. So it's not always easy. Check out the talons in this photograph. Pretty sharp, pretty formidable looking. We can assume that these belong to a raptor. What about these ones though? They look pretty darn sharp to me. They're covered in scales, just like the other ones. They have little squishy pads at the bottom that presumably are a function of something. But if we were to zoom outwards, those feet actually belong to a downy woodpecker, the smallest woodpecker species here in North America. Looks
And
can be
definitely not a
deceiving,
raptor.
and definitely not a raptor. Now, when it comes to looking at the beak, right? We've talked about talons. Let's talk about that hooked beak. This little dude clearly does not have a beak that resembles that of a raptor. But this guy does. And we all know that African gray parrots are not raptors, although that's another conversation for a later date too. When thinking about those amazing eyes, eyes like a hawk, eagle eyes, owl eyes in front like to hunt, large, spacious eyes designed to catch low light and see for miles, well, that's definitely the case with the saw-whet owl, who is a raptor, one of our nocturnal raptors in our owl family. But what about this guy?
Oh boy.
His eyeballs look pretty darn similar, and they are designed for low light. The beak is technically hooked, and they are carnivorous. This is a potu, my friends, and this guy loves to eat moths and other nocturnal flying creatures, sometimes bats, sometimes bugs, but predominantly the moth species. He's absolutely not a raptor, but he shares some of those qualifications. Well, this is getting really tricky. Okay, the last one. We talked about the beak, we talked about the talons, we talked about the eyes. Now we'll talk about the diet. I told you guys before that all raptors are carnivorous, as is the case with the osprey mowing on the fish. But so too is the kingfisher, and they're certainly not classified as raptors. So I think what it comes down to is not only just language, but putting all of those things together, which is what my 6th grade students did last week when I tasked them with deciding what makes a raptor. And they created this delightful specimen, a frankenraptor, who is not only carnivorous, but has the hooked beak, has the sharp talons, has the ratchet grip, which we wouldn't be able to see based on this taxidermy representation, and has exceptional eyesight. So when we put all of those classifications together, then, and only then, do we get the raptor.
Can you explain to everybody how this thing came to be?
Sure. Yes, we don't just give children like dead animal parts to play with. So we have a peregrine falcon monitoring program that goes over to the Manchester School District this year. And in one of our last classes, we were doing pretty much the same presentation I just did with you guys before we jump into activities. And so we talked about what makes a raptor. And then the students get to handle parts of a raptor in order to really visually experience and touch, and some of them even will smell, what these parts look, smell, experience, resemble, in an effort to acknowledge that raptors come in a variety of shapes and sizes and colors and patterns, but all have some of those features in common. And it's only when all of them are put together, like these kids chose to do. This was totally on their own, by the way. This was absolutely spur of the moment. They created it, pulled me over and said, Frankenraptors. That's amazing. Slightly terrifying,
they
but
developed
mostly
the name
amazing.
as well.
I named it Frankenraptor, but they all
okay.
joined in really quickly after that. It's the first thing that came to mind. So there's a red-tailed hawkwing, there's a red-shouldered hawkwing, there's a Cooper's hawktail, there's bald eagle talons, and there's a broadwing. I think it's a broadwing hawkhead. And they created it. And then the idea was to have them start thinking about how it is that this bird could survive in a natural habitat. But they had to figure out the habitat first. So it's a big program. It's 5 months long. It's kind of like what we do with you guys, but it's a bit more hands-on. They get to do some activities, and it's really, really amazing. But that is the story of that one.
Okay, here we are.
Okay.
So let's move forward. We're going to talk in greater detail about some of these specific qualities that that birds of prey, and in particular eagles, have that give them the advantages and make them the successful birds that they are. We already talked a little bit about eyes. Eagle eyes can pick up on motion at great distances, and these guys are clearly focused on visual hunting. There's certainly animals that use their ears to track prey, and some that use their sense of smell. But eagles are tremendous visual beasts, and they do their ability to pick up on motion and to distinguish certain types of motion from others is amazing. Thinking about looking into the surface of the water to see a fish that's near the surface, when you've got all that refraction and reflection on the water, it's really remarkable. Most raptors have a bony area above their eye that is called a supraorbital ridge. That is essentially, it's a prominent spot that essentially its goal is to protect the eye in many different ways. It actually provides a little bit of shading from the overhead sun. It protects them from branches or debris that they might be encountering in the course of landing in trees, things like that. If they're after prey or involved in something like that, there's a chance of material flying up and getting in the eye. The supraorbital ridge actually shelters their eye a great deal and protects the eye in many different ways. Something I actually didn't know until recently was that birds of prey have more vertebrae than most mammals, which is helpful in the fact that they rotate their head quite a bit to see things. And that actually feeds into one of the next things coming up. The bare cere is the part where the nostrils are. And it doesn't have feathers on it because that area is the area that gets really messy in the course of feeding. The best example of this is, of course, in vultures, which have no feathers on most of their head because they're feeding down inside carcasses on a regular basis. But bald eagles have, and most other birds of prey actually have the fleshy part above the beak that we call the cere. And in almost every case, except owls, that is an area that is bare exposed skin. I wanted to mention, though, this supraorbital, or excuse me, the sclerotic ring on the eye. It's a bony structure that surrounds the eyeballs. It's not something that mammals have. It's not something that people have, but it fixes the eye in place. It supports the eyes and keeps their vision sharp, but it reduces their ability to move their eyes in the way that we do, looking left or looking right. We can do that without turning our heads. But birds of prey, if you think about it, are quite notable for the fact that they are oftentimes moving their head around. I think about eagles or falcons who are trying to determine how far it is to something they're looking at. They'll oftentimes move their head around like this because they are triangulating where the item is and how far away it is. They have to do that by moving their head because they can't move their eyes around because they are fixed, almost fixed in place by the fact that they have the sclerotic ring. It protects their eyes, though. It's a trade-off, and it protects their eyes. There's a lot of things that can cause impact to the heads of eagles, and so the supraorbital ridge and the sclerotic ring both are insurance mechanisms, I guess, for the health and safety and longevity of this highly visual animal. Another thing that relates to that is the nictitating membrane, essentially an eyelash, or an eye, what's the word for it? Eyelid, excuse me, that comes and goes over the eyeball to protect the eye from, again, debris, particularly when you're going into a carcass or when you're about to initiate a bite. If you had a slow motion picture of these birds, you would see often that the moment they reach in to do the biting, that membrane covers the eye and keeps the eye safe from debris. So all those are adaptations that we think of when we think of birds of prey and eagles specifically. On the head. Now, on the feet, I'm fascinated to look at eagle talons. Who can imagine designing a foot like this? This is just the most amazing, complicated looking apparatus. Look at those 2 feet on the big picture on the right hand side. All the notches and nodules and scales. Some of this is probably left over from the time before birds were birds, when they were more closely related to the dinosaurs than they are now. And the material, the anatomy is still useful for these birds. The padding provides them grip. The ultimate example of this would be ospreys, which have incredibly sandpaper-like feet with all kinds of little hooks, essentially hooks on them, that help them grab the slippery fish. Eagles need the same thing. So not only do they have the 4 talons that can puncture the food item and hold on to it, but they have additional grip in the bottoms of their foot pads. So on the far left bottom, you see the various sizes of talons, from something almost double the size of a bald eagle, the harpy eagle, down to the smaller falcons and owls that we have here in New Hampshire. We talked already about the ratchet grip and how when their feet are closed, they don't have to force them closed. They naturally will close and stay that way. And the ratchet grip helps when you are perching, because you continue to grip even if you've got one leg up, or if you're preening or something like that, that other foot can hold you on that branch effectively. Let's talk about feathers for a minute. How about that? There's all kinds of plumage involved with our birds of prey, and eagles are a good example of this. Initially, when an egg hatches, the chick is almost bare-skinned, but what really is the case is it has a wet, matted natal down. And whoops, sorry, I didn't even see that because my picture is right there. I can't move it. So anyway, the natal down is the first down, and within hours of hatching of the eggs, this down fluffs up and creates the bird's first thermal layer. It's not enough to keep them warm without the addition of heat from the parents, but it is a start, and it is insulation. It's like your long underwear layer. It's the initial layer. In the course of about 3 weeks, young eagles will shed that down for a second layer of down called a thermal down. And that is a much warmer coating, less fine, more like a good pile jacket than the initial down. This down actually has some properties of keeping heat inside, to the point that by the time this chick is 3 to 4 weeks old and has this thermal down, they're actually able to keep themselves warm. They don't need the additional heat from the parent brooding them. And then after this down, after about 3 to 4 weeks, young eagles will begin to develop their juvenile plumage, excuse me, which is the emergence of feathers throughout the body along different tracts of feathers. Oftentimes the back and the wings are some of the first things to develop the feathers. And the amazing thing about these body feathers is that they literally grow and almost bloom out of the feather shaft, almost like a flower blooms. These birds have the feather shaft's in place, and the feather literally emerges out of that shaft like it came out of the straw, and essentially blossoms right over the course of several weeks into full-sized juvenile feathers that coat the whole body. So you see that on those nestlings, that plumage eventually develops into the full body plumage of the bird on the far left here. Let's see if I've got that there. This first-year juvenile eagle, which, thinking about it, I think it might actually be a second-year juvenile eagle. And the reason I say that is because its eye is yellowing, and in the first-year eagles, the eye is still brown. So this is probably a second-year bird, but almost entirely brown feathers. That's what you expect to see on a first-year juvenile. And what we don't show in this picture is between the first-year juvenile and the adult plumage, you have a series of molts. Each of them produces a slightly different plumage, second year, third year, and fourth year. And it's only in the third or fourth year you start to see the beginnings of the white head and the white tail, which even in the fourth year isn't fully white. So you get to about 5 years of age and several different molts before you see adult plumage eagle with the white head and tail, which they then will keep in that same plumage coloration for possibly even more than a couple decades if they live that long. However, they continue to molt, but they replace with the adult plumage again and again after that. So just a remarkable amount of complexity in this, I think. We've already mentioned that's an adult. I don't know. There's so much variation in the size of these birds, and I will say that while we have numbers attached here for the average size of these birds, typically female raptors are bigger than their male counterparts, unlike things like bears and most other mammals, where the males oftentimes are the bigger animal. In most cases, the female birds of prey are the larger of the two, and you can oftentimes distinguish them from each other in size if they are close together in the same posture. You can see two adult eagles on a nest and tell which is the male by its smaller size. So these are average numbers. The females can be maybe even up to 84 inches in wingspan. The males are rarely ever 80 inches in wingspan. But you can see the wide range in our larger birds of prey, from red-tailed hawks and ospreys up to a bird which we don't see often and never see in New Hampshire, the California condor. We should have stuck in a stellar sea eagle in this one, huh?
I actually thought about that, Chris.
Those guys are truly monsters, amazingly large birds. And there may be a few people in this audience who have made the trek to Maine either last year or recently this year to see that bird. A really amazing animal. Let's see, what else do I want to tell you about? The flight feathers, all the different feathers on eagles' wings. Does this one have
Yeah,
labels?
Yep.
Okay. I didn't want to pass it by. So these wings are made for soaring. Birds of prey have remarkable wings, starting with the fact that underlying all this is a skeletal structure. And we talk about the different parts of these wings, some of which are supported directly by bone, others which are an extension of the bones. Let's begin with the primaries. Eagles and most other birds of prey have 10 primaries on each wing. You can count them here. I don't know if I could get my cursor to work, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 primaries that all emanate from the very tip of the bony part of the wing, essentially the equivalent of your hand. This is the hand section of a wing. And then the forearm section has the double bones that we know that we have in our forearm. The secondaries come out of that part of the wing. The secondaries in birds can range from as few as 6 secondaries in hummers to as many as 40 secondaries in albatrosses. Eagles typically have 14 on each wing. The secondaries have a different function than the primaries. I didn't mention the primaries are designed to provide thrust. You might not think that. You might think that the big extended part of the wing would be for lift, but actually it's designed to do acceleration and motion. And in fact, eagles can control the orientation of these feathers to a considerable degree. And so depending on what it is they're trying to do, they can bring them together, they can point them, they can even change the angle of these feathers. But the secondaries are the ones that provide lift and soaring. They're the feathers that really give the air something to push against. And so you've got maneuverability with these feathers, you've got lift and buoyancy with the secondary feathers. So that's one of the functions, the differing functions of these two groups of feathers in the wings. Then there's this special little feather here. I should
click and you'll have
I should proceed, shouldn't I? With
yes,
my
proceed.
clicking. We've
There's
already covered
secondaries.
secondaries. Then this little feather here, I'm going to show you the one on this one. This is called the alula. It's like a third part of the wing. Really, what it reminds me of is if you look out of a passenger plane as the plane is taking off or landing, especially landing, you'll see the flaps extend in different ways. The alula is designed for increasing lift and postponing stall when a bird is coming into land. And you'll see it oftentimes flare out at the last second in a slow motion video and it's providing extra little fine tuning in the course of eagles breaking and coming into land, among other things, but also can be used as they pursue prey or change directions or engage in all kinds of acrobatics in the air. So that's the alula.
That's awesome.
And of course, I usually go for the common names on things like this. Eagles have 12 rectrices. Those are their tail feathers, divided down the middle, 6 on a side. When they molt them oftentimes in matching pairs. I call them tail feathers. And it's interesting to look at a younger eagle who will have a mixture of different plumage tail feathers. Some entirely white, some mixture of brown and white. So that's the back end of the eagle. Of course, there's also the body feathers as well, the contour feathers. So, but rectrices is the technical term for eagle's tail feathers. Now, let's see if we can make this baby work.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed.
What's that?
Fingers crossed. Alula's
Fingers
crossed.
Didn't go. Among the different things that eagles do with these incredible wings is maneuver in courtship or other play where they will lock talons and spin around in midair. Oftentimes we associate this with courtship, but there's other cases where it's happening in younger eagles, and it's essentially just practice play, learning to be an eagle, basically. And this is an incredible motion video, and I'm looking forward to sharing this with everybody in a link. So we'll do that.
We'll get it to you guys. We'll get it to you guys.
And that the same would hold true for this one as well. This is truly unfortunate that we can't show you this one. Eagles are amazing as they will see a fish in the water under the surface, despite the reflection and despite the refraction that comes when you're in the water. Things are not where they appear to be. under the surface of the water. And eagles compensate for that over time, learning how to differentiate between where it appears a fish is and where it actually is under the water surface. And take a look at this picture though. Even this still image shows you exactly what I was talking about with the alula.
Mm-hmm.
This bird has its flaps fully extended right now as it's stalling and braking for capture of a fish. And you can see this specialized feather sticking out there, creating extra steering ability and extra braking ability. So again, I'm so sorry that we didn't count on this fact.
We can share it afterwards for sure. Once we get to this, once I start sharing the
go
screen.
back to it maybe.
Precisely.
All right, so let's talk about behavior for a minute. There's winter is today is a challenging day for eagles, but not particularly challenging, probably more challenging for us than it is for these big birds of prey, who are perfectly capable of dealing with temperatures down near zero. They are actually masters of the winter environment. Most of our eagles don't need to leave New Hampshire in the winter because they're capable of surviving in snow and ice. Whether it be finding places to get food, like the guys on the bottom of the screen here, or up here on the upper right. I just want to mention that as of today, in New Hampshire, we have confirmed at least 7 pairs of our nesting bald eagles that are already incubating eggs. And you'll see right here, this might be the kind of scene that some of them are dealing with today. Fully engulfed in a pile of snow on their nest. Eagles have to keep the eggs warm 24/7 for 5 straight weeks. And they do that by trading off places and every now and then shaking off the snow and then switching places with their mate, who then covers the eggs with their body and hopefully not with snow, because an egg surrounded by snow is an egg that probably will not hatch. But yet eagles endure this frequently on a regular basis, frequently successfully, because they are so practiced at keeping those eggs dry and warm, and very disciplined, I guess is a good way to put it. They are able to, in most cases, survive these tough, challenging moments and get onto the warmer weather. There are certainly cases where a heavy snowstorm, heavy wet snow in particular, will cause eagles to abandon a nest. It certainly happens. And even more so, the risk of a heavy wet snow on the nest structure itself is a risk that they face. The nest itself might collapse because of the snow. But eagles have features that allow them to survive in this cold weather. They, again, the key is to keep those eggs dry and separated from the piles of snow by whatever means you can. Amazing though, the eagles are as delicate with their eggs as they are. They have sharp talons and a sharp beak, and yet they are manipulating these eggs for weeks at a time with those same tools. Although they're able to pull their talons in and sort of push the eggs around with their fist instead of with their talons themselves. I want to also mention another physiological adaptation that they have, the countercurrent heat exchange in their feet, which means the veins and the arteries in their legs are positioned really close together. And that allows the warm blood heading towards the feet to actually rewarm the cold blood that's going back towards the body again, because those two vessels are in very close proximity. And so you've got the heat coming off of the body heat coming down the leg, not only heating the foot, but also rewarming the cold blood that gets much colder while it's in the foot than while it's in the body. So it's a heat exchange called countercurrent heat exchange that reduces heat loss and in the long run saves eagle a lot of energy, because the only alternative to this would be working really hard to keep your feet warm all the time without by motion and by eating constantly. Those two things. So it's an amazing design that most of our birds have, even our little birds like chickadees, who somehow get those little feet to survive the winter. I know my feet are cold just by going outside in the snow to shovel it. So I don't have the same counter current heat exchanger that birds do. So.
No, Chris, you do not, but we do have some mammals that are capable of doing that. Notably the caribou, who are able to live in tundra locations up to their knees, and their counter current heat exchange starts almost at the shoulder to go all the way down to those hooves and back.
Incredible.
Someone a little bit closer to home would be our moose, who does the same concept. And it's just because the arteries and the veins are closer together so that they can counter that heat exchange. Whereas us humans, we're not biologically adapted as efficiently. Ours are a bit separate, and so it wouldn't do the same thing, which is why if you guys go outside and put your hands in the snow for periods of time, you're just going to get hypothermia. But these guys can walk on the snow without it actually melting beneath them, because their feet are almost the same temperature as the snow, if not sometimes colder. It's astounding. Think of ducks. Think of the ducks and the mergansers swimming about in those frozen, almost frozen rivers.
Swimming right in 32-degree water, yeah.
Oh, makes me cold just thinking about it.
Anyway, that's one more physiological factoid about our birds of prey and how they manage to survive the cold times. I have one more thing I want to talk about, and that's eagles' eating style. How about that? They are great hunters. They can catch plenty of live food on their own. They're also carrion eaters, able to rip open large dead items and feed on the muscle and the organs, and at the same time create food for other animals that aren't able to do that. Everything from the chickadees up to other raptors, even. But another cool word describes eagles' ability to take what they want from others, and it's called kleptoparasitism. They are a stealing parasite. How about that for a great way to describe eagles? They are incredibly smart and resourceful in doing things like finding bait fish on the ice, whether it be just tossed there by a fisherman who dumped their bait at the end of the day, or whether intentionally placed there by fishermen. They're able to pick those babies out and eat them. But they also are great at pursuing other hunters, things that have worked really hard to acquire a food item, like on the far right upper side here, the great blue heron, which has got a fish and it just wants to take it back to a place where it can eat it or feed it to its young. But darn it, it's got a bald eagle right in hot pursuit. And in order to lighten the load and escape from the eagle, the heron has to decide, well, how important is this fish to me right now? And do I want to live to hunt another day? And so the heron will jettison the fish. And oh, by the way, all of a sudden the eagle's not interested in the heron anymore. It's interested in that fish that fell to the ice or into the water. What's really interesting with herons is oftentimes they don't carry the fish in their beak. They carry the fish in their gullet. And so they literally have to get that cargo out again in order to lighten the load. It's quite a scene when an eagle is on the tail of a great blue heron. And I've seen that plenty of times. Okay. Bottom left side, if you are a fox and you've got a rabbit in your mouth and you are trotting home to feed the babies, well, better be looking over your shoulder, because the eagle might see that and might come after you. And if you are unlucky, the eagle might snag you while it's trying to snag the bunny rabbit, which is what happened in the picture in the lower left. Eagles will oftentimes test other eagles that have food, especially if they perceive any weakness or any inexperience. They will see if they can't intimidate a younger eagle into giving up its fish. But I've seen it go the other way too, whereas a big female 2-year-old eagle who has an attitude will find an adult male eagle that's got food and try to intimidate that bird into dropping its fish. So it goes both ways. Size matters with these guys, and if you're big and confident, you can probably intimidate your way into a meal, and that's one strategy of kleptoparasitism. Another strategy is just to find a fisherman and wait till it gets a fish on the line. That has its hazards, actually, because there are hooks in there, and the potential for people who haven't wised up to be using lead sinkers or other lead items, which an eagle might ingest. But fishermen and eagles have a long, complicated relationship with each other. And it's kleptoparasitism is an awfully big word for just being resourceful and finding a meal, which is what eagles are good at doing.
Agreed.
So that's pretty encyclopedic list of different traits and characteristics of bald eagles. And we want to talk about history now?
Well, so I'm looking at the clock and realizing, per usual, we are out of time, because when the two of us get together, we can talk for 10 hours about raptors. But I think what we're going to do, so spur of the moment idea right here, is I have a poll for you guys. It's only 4 questions, and it pertains to the history of the bald eagle. So my thought is, if I throw you guys the poll, it takes like 30 seconds to complete, we will end the presentation with Q&A and save the answers to the poll, as well as the pre-DDT history of the bald eagle, which I've been studying for 24 hours to remember. We'll do that with our next presentation. Our next presentation is exactly a month from today, so we will be meeting on March 28th. And I'm going to send you guys the poll real quick. So feel free to, you don't have to fill it out. It's not mandatory. No one's getting tested on this, but if you'd like to participate, please do. And otherwise, if you have questions, start typing them into the Q&A box now, because that is absolutely how we will wrap things up today.
I'll start.
Thank you. Please do.
I don't know if this is an early question or a late question, but I have a question from Tom McShane. He says, what part of the state are the early nesting eagles in? And well, we would guess that they might be on, I don't know, the southern border or the seacoast. But I'm here to tell you that the first pair confirmed this year was in Warren, New Hampshire, which is not really tropical. It's in the mountains. But we've also had confirmed pairs in the Connecticut Valley, in the Merrimack Valley, and down near the coast. So all over the state. Has more to do with experience, I think, than it does with location. So 3 types of falcons in New Hampshire that breed here are kestrel, merlin, and peregrine. The other one that drifts through on occasion is the gyrfalcon, going to the Arctic to breed. Should I do another one?
Yeah, keep going. While you're answering, I'm gonna throw some of those links into the chat.
We have an anonymous attendee who didn't want to reveal who they were, who asked an incredibly good question. Is the northern harrier a raptor?
Good one.
And the answer is yes, absolutely. And I don't think we included them in our list of.
I think I included them in the hawk species.
In a hawk species? Okay. All right. Well, we'll let you off the hook.
I would never forget the harrier. They're one of my favorites too. That's next year's resilient raptor. Maybe.
Okay, I don't know. I haven't read this one yet, so maybe I shouldn't tackle. Oh, I want to talk about Stephanie's question. She talked about eagles versus ospreys. And in fact, there's a lot of eagle versus osprey direct conflict over fish. But she points out that today it was noted that eagles appear to be incubating in what is well known to be an osprey nesting platform on the Squamscott River.
Oh,
okay.
That's going to be interesting.
And so if true, it's going to be an interesting late March, early April when the ospreys return to what they assume is their nest and find eagles incubating eggs there. They will not be pleased.
No, they will
That
not.
is correct. And there will probably be attempts by the ospreys to get the eagles off their platform.
Indeed.
And could be very interesting stuff.
Eagles want
eagles are
osprey
bigger than
zero.
ospreys. So I don't know, I probably should stop.
No, I mean, if you guys are still, we still have 105 folks on. If you guys, I sent out the link. I'm sending it in the Q&A, and I just popped it into the chat. So we have that available. You already answered the Nestor and the Falcons and the Northern Harrier. And
Matthew has so many good questions.
the crow raven. What is the? I found a dead crow or raven in a tree, all tangled up in fish line. What is
We
like
could come up with all kinds of possible
They
scenarios.
probably did. I have seen videos of these guys, the corvid family, so the ravens, the jays, the crows, the magpies. I saw a video of a raven, documented video of the raven who had learned to pull the fishing line out of the ice hole with his beak, step on it with his foot, and retrieve it again in a systematic element. So I would say it's the likely story is that it probably did that exact thing and then somehow managed to bring it up to a tree
and got the
wings
stuff.
were moving. Exactly.
Let's ask the question about an hour ago, which I'm going to answer. How many mated pairs of eagles do we have in New Hampshire currently? As of 2022, we documented 92 territorial pairs of eagles. Those are two eagles, presumably mates together. Whether or not we found a nest and whether or not they were confirmed to lay eggs, we expect, based on the pattern we've had, that we'll be up in the neighborhood of 100 or more territorial pairs in 2023. But that is yet to be determined because the season is just getting started.
Awesome. Chris, there's another one that just came in that is very interesting from Betsy. The question is, eagles live in live trees, osprey in dead trees. True or false?
Eagles nest in live trees, ospreys in dead trees. Frequently true, but not always true. It's very hard to find 100% guaranteed rules in nature. Typically, eagles do prefer to nest with overhead cover, so they'll nest in a live pine or a cottonwood tree where there are leaves or needles providing some shade. Whereas ospreys oftentimes nest in extremely exposed spots with full sunlight, full exposure to the wind and weather, perhaps because they want to make sure they can see in every direction all around them in case a potential predator comes in, like an eagle. And if eagles prefer shady spots to nest, I guess that might reduce the frequency at which their osprey nests are taken over by bald eagles. But it's not a guarantee.
I think we're going to close on that one. So Chris has his puppet. Thank you all. Thank you all so much for being here. We hope you learned something new. If you learned nothing at all, you've got some new words for Scrabble. Kleptoparasitism, that's a keeper. And
we'll see you next month.
Happy health, and see you a month from today. Happy short February. This is it. Okay. Good night, everyone. Bye, Chris.
Good night, Willa. Good night, everybody.